I thought the hardest part of my day would be dealing with a broken espresso machine, not having a billionaire CEO slam her perfectly manicured hands on my counter, demanding to know why her crying daughter was clinging to my leg and calling me mommy. Welcome to the channel. If you love thrilling, romantic, and heart-pounding GL stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment down below to let us know you want more. Your support helps us bring more of these amazing stories to life. Now let's dive into the story. Part 1: The Storm in the Sterling. The rain in Seattle was relentless that Tuesday afternoon, beating against the large glass windows of the Daily Grind, my little independent cafe nestled between two towering corporate skyscrapers. I am Harper. Just Harper. 26. My entire world consisted of flour, coffee beans, and a mountain of debt left behind by my late father. I wiped down the espresso machine with a sigh, the warm scent of vanilla and roasted hazelnut offering a small comfort against the dreary gray weather outside. Café was completely empty. It was past 3 in the afternoon, the lunchtime rush had long ended, and the torrential downpour had chased away my usual afternoon regulars. I was just about to flip the open sign to closed when the little bell above the door chimed frantically. I looked up, expecting a drenched businessman looking for a quick caffeine fix. Instead, what I saw made my heart stop. A little girl no older than 5 stood in the doorway. She was entirely alone. She wore a soaking wet, ridiculously expensive-looking pink cashmere coat. Her dark hair was plastered to her pale cheeks, and her chest heaved with panicked, heavy sobs. Before I could even ask her where her parents were, her wide, tear-filled blue eyes locked onto me. She let out a piercing cry, bolted across the cafe, and scrambled behind the counter. To my absolute shock, she wrapped her tiny arms around my legs, burying her face into my flour-dusted apron. "Mommy," she wailed, her little voice cracking with desperation. "Hide me, Mommy. Please." I froze, my hands hovering awkwardly in the air. "Oh, sweetie," I whispered, kneeling down carefully so I was at her eye level. My heart ached at the sight of her trembling shoulders. I gently brushed a wet strand of hair from her forehead. "I'm not your mommy, honey. Are you lost? Where is your family?" She just shook her head furiously, refusing to let go of my apron. Her tiny fists gripped the fabric with surprising strength. "You smell like Mommy," she whimpered, pressing her face into the crook of my neck. "Vanilla. Hide me. The scary ladies in the black cars are coming." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty cafe. Scary ladies in black cars? I immediately stood up, instinctively positioning myself between the little girl and the front door. I reached for the landline phone on the counter, intending to call the police, but before my fingers could even touch the receiver, the street outside was bathed in the harsh, blinding headlights of 3 massive, matte black SUVs. They screeched to a halt right in front of my cafe, completely blocking the sidewalk. The little girl whimpered, squeezing her eyes shut and hiding completely behind my legs. "They're here," she cried softly. The doors of the SUVs swung open simultaneously. 4 women in sharp, tailored black suits stepped out into the pouring rain, ignoring the weather completely. They moved with terrifying precision, flanking the rear door of the middle vehicle. One of them opened it, holding up a large black umbrella. Then she stepped out. Even through the rain-streaked glass of my cafe, the woman commanded the very air around her. She was tall, strikingly so. She wore a dark gray, flawlessly tailored blazer that accentuated her sharp shoulders, paired with trousers that fell perfectly over polished black stilettos. Her raven hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek bun, not a single strand out of place despite the storm. But it was her face that stole my breath. She possessed a cold, devastating beauty. High cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and eyes so piercingly icy I could feel their chill from 30 feet away. Victoria Sterling. I recognized her instantly. Everyone in the city knew who she was. She was the ruthless, untouchable CEO of Sterling Tech, a woman who bought and sold companies before breakfast and had a reputation for leaving a trail of broken competitors in her wake. She was known as the alpha of the corporate world, dominant, unyielding, and terrifyingly brilliant, and she was currently walking straight toward my front door. The chime of the bell sounded like a death knell as Victoria Sterling stepped into my cafe. Her bodyguards immediately fanned out, locking the door behind them and flipping the sign to closed. The atmosphere in the room plummeted by 10 degrees. The air grew thick, heavy with the sheer weight of her presence. Victoria's icy blue eyes, the exact same shade as the little girl trembling behind me, swept over the modest interior of my cafe with a look of mild disgust before locking onto me. Her gaze was like a physical strike. It was predatory, calculating, and smoldering with a barely contained fury. "Where is she?" Victoria's voice was low, smooth as velvet, but laced with absolute authority. Sent a highly inappropriate shiver down my spine. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. I was intimidated, yes, but I wasn't about to let an angry billionaire storm into my space and traumatize a crying child. "If you mean the little girl," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "she ran in here terrified. I was just about to call the police." Victoria took a slow, deliberate step toward the counter. The scent of her expensive perfume, cedarwood and dark amber, mingled with the vanilla of my bakery, creating an intoxicating, dizzying contrast. "You will not call anyone," Victoria said, stopping just inches from the counter. She leaned forward, placing her hands on the wooden surface. I found myself staring at her long, elegant fingers. "You will hand over my daughter, Lily, right now. And if I find out you had anything to do with her wandering off, I will ensure you spend the rest of your pathetic life in a cell." Anger finally pierced through my fear. I narrowed my eyes, refusing to back down from her intense stare. "Excuse me? I have never seen this child before in my life. She ran in here crying, hiding from you and your goons. Maybe if you were a little less terrifying, she wouldn't have run away in the first place." The bodyguards behind Victoria visibly tensed. Someone gasped. Clearly, no one spoke to the great Victoria Sterling like that. Victoria's eyes darkened, a dangerous flicker of surprise and fury igniting in their depths. She looked at me as if I were a puzzle she wanted to crush in her hands. She opened her mouth to verbally destroy me, but before she could, a tiny voice broke the tension. "No!" Lily peeked out from behind my legs. She glared fiercely at Victoria, her tiny hands still gripping my apron. "Don't yell at her. She's nice. She's my new mommy." Dead silence fell over the cafe. You could hear a pin drop. Victoria stared at her daughter, the anger melting away into a look of absolute earth-shattering shock. Her imposing posture faltered for a fraction of a second. She looked from Lily to me and back to Lily. "Lily." Victoria's voice was suddenly stripped of all its commanding edge. It sounded breathless. Fragile. "The you just spoke." I looked between the two of them, thoroughly confused. Of course she spoke. She's been talking to me since she got in here. One of the bodyguards, a tall blonde woman, stepped forward, her eyes wide. "Ma'am, Miss Lily hasn't spoken a single word in over 8 months. Not since." The guard trailed off, looking at Victoria. My heart gave a painful thud. 8 months? This sweet little girl hadn't spoken in 8 months, and the first thing she said was calling a total stranger her mother? Victoria slowly lowered herself into a crouch, ruining the sharp crease of her expensive pants against my flour-dusted floor. "Lily," she said softly, holding out a hand. "Come here, little one. It's time to go home." "No." Lily pressed herself closer to my legs, burying her face again. "I want to stay with Mommy. She smells good. She feels warm. Your house is cold." Victoria's jaw clenched tight. I could see a flash of deep, agonizing pain in her eyes before the icy corporate mask slammed back into place. She stood up slowly, towering over me once again. She looked at me, really looked at me this time. Her eyes scanned my messy hair, the smudges of flour on my cheeks, the worn-out fabric of my clothes. The intense scrutiny made my breath catch in my throat. I felt entirely exposed, yet strangely captivated by her fierce gaze. "What is your name?" Victoria demanded, the velvet smoothness returning to her voice. "Harper," I said defiantly. "Harper Davis." Victoria stared at my lips as I spoke, before her gaze snapped back up to meet my eyes. Tension between us was suddenly thick, crackling with something heavy and unexplained. It was suffocating. It was terrifying. And it was thrilling. "Well, Miss Davis," Victoria said, pulling a sleek black phone from her pocket and typing a quick message. "It seems my daughter has formed an unreasonable attachment to you. And since Lily's well-being is the only thing in this world I care about." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and took one step closer, so close I could feel the heat radiating off her body. "You are going to pack a bag," Victoria whispered, her voice dropping to a husky register that made my toes curl. "'Cause you are coming home with us. And you are not leaving my daughter's side until I say so." I stared at her in utter disbelief. "You're out of your mind. I have a business to run. I'm not going anywhere with you." A slow, dangerous smirk tugged at the corner of Victoria's perfectly painted red lips. It was a smile that promised absolute ruin. "Oh, Harper," she murmured, leaning in until her lips were mere inches from my ear. "I wasn't asking for your permission." End of part 1. Part 2, the contract and the cold estate. "I wasn't asking for your permission." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy, competing with the scent of roasted coffee beans and the sound of the relentless Seattle rain lashing against the windows. I stared at Victoria Sterling, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The sheer audacity of the woman was suffocating. She stood in my small, humble café like a queen demanding tribute from a peasant, completely disregarding the fact that human beings couldn't just be collected and bagged up like luxury handbags. "You can't just kidnap me," I said, my voice trembling slightly before I forced it into a steady, defiant tone. "I don't care how many billions of dollars you have or how many intimidating bodyguards you brought with you. I am not a piece of property, Ms. Sterling. I have a life. I have a business." Victoria didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her icy blue eyes slowly traced the perimeter of the cafe, taking in the chipped paint near the baseboards, the mismatched vintage chairs, and the aging espresso machine that hissed softly in the background. "A business?" Victoria repeated, her voice dripping with an aristocratic amusement that made my blood boil. "You call this a business?" From what my preliminary intelligence suggests, the daily grind is currently drowning in a sea of red ink. Your father, bless his optimistic heart, took out a second mortgage to keep this place afloat. A mortgage that you inherited upon his passing 6 months ago. You are exactly 3 weeks away from the bank foreclosing on this property, Harper. The air was knocked out of my lungs. I took a step back, my hands gripping the edge of the wooden counter for support. How did she know that? I hadn't told a single soul about the foreclosure notice tucked away in the drawer beneath the cash register. I had been working 80-hour weeks, trying desperately to drum up enough revenue to negotiate with the bank, slowly drowning in the stress of losing the only piece of my father I had left. How? I swallowed hard, feeling entirely exposed under her predatory gaze. How could you possibly know that? You've been in here for 5 minutes. A sleek, silver tablet suddenly appeared in Victoria's hands, passed to her by the tall blonde bodyguard. Victoria tapped the screen once with a perfectly manicured nail. "I am Victoria Sterling. I do not step into a room without knowing exactly who and what I am dealing with. The moment Lily ran into this establishment, my security team ran a full background check on the owner of the premises. It took 30 seconds. She stepped closer, the intoxicating scent of cedarwood and dark amber washing over me again. "You are desperate, Harper Davis. You are fighting a losing battle. But I am in the business of offering solutions." I narrowed my eyes. "What kind of solution?" "A mutually beneficial arrangement," Victoria said smoothly, never breaking eye contact. My daughter has not spoken a single word since a traumatic incident 8 months ago. My staff, a team of the best pediatric psychologists in the country, and myself have tried everything. Yet she runs into your dusty little shop, buries her face in your apron, and speaks. She wants you. Victoria glanced down at Lily, who was still clinging tightly to my leg, her huge blue eyes darting nervously between her mother and me. For a fleeting second, the terrifying CEO mask slipped, and I saw a flash of profound, agonizing desperation in Victoria's expression. It was the look of a mother who would burn the world down to hear her child's voice. "I will pay off your father's debt," Victoria stated, her voice dropping to a low, husky whisper that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. "Every single penny. I will purchase the deed to this building and transfer it solely into your name, free and clear. You will never have to worry about a bank threatening your livelihood again." My breath hitched. The offer was staggering. It was the answer to every sleepless night, every tear shed over unpaid bills, every terrifying thought of losing my father's legacy. It was salvation. And in return? I asked cautiously, knowing that a deal with the devil always came with a steep price. "In return, you belong to me for the next 6 months, Victoria commanded, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You will pack your belongings and move into the Sterling estate immediately. You will be Lily's exclusive companion. You will be at her side day and night. You will coax her out of her shell, you will ensure she continues to speak, and you will be exactly whatever it is she needs you to be. You will not leave the estate without my explicit permission. Do we have a deal, Miss Davis?" I looked down at Lily. The little girl peered up at me, her lower lip trembling slightly. "Please, Mommy," she whispered, her tiny hand reaching up to tug at my apron string. "Don't leave me with the cold lady." My heart broke into a million pieces. The cold lady was her own mother. Whatever had happened in that massive, wealthy family, it had completely fractured the bond between this child and the woman standing before me. I looked back up at Victoria. Beneath the tailored suit and the billionaire bravado, I saw the flinch in her jaw when Lily called her the cold lady. I didn't just need the money. I needed to make sure this little girl was safe. "Fine," I breathed out, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it. But I have conditions." Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched upwards. "Conditions? You are hardly in a position to make demands, Harper." "I just did," I shot back, lifting my chin, refusing to let her completely dominate the space. "1, I am doing this for Lily, not for you. Do not treat me like one of your corporate lackeys. 2, I am not a prisoner. If I need to check on the café, I will. And 3, you will not speak to your daughter like she is a board meeting agenda item. If I'm going to be her companion, I do it my way. Take it or leave it." The café fell dead silent. The bodyguards shifted uncomfortably, clearly expecting their boss to obliterate me. Victoria stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. Her icy eyes roamed over my face, searching for a sign of weakness. When she found none, a slow, dangerous smirk touched her lips. It was a thrilling, terrifying expression. "You have fire, Harper Davis," Victoria murmured, her gaze dropping briefly to my lips before snapping back to my eyes. "I accept your terms. Sarah, help Miss Davis pack her belongings." 30 minutes later, I found myself sitting in the back of a ridiculously massive, bulletproof black SUV. My entire life had been packed into 2 duffel bags, currently sitting in the trunk. Plush leather seats felt like sitting on a cloud, a stark contrast to the hard, chaotic reality I had just left behind. Lily was asleep, her small head resting comfortably in my lap, her tiny hands still gripping the fabric of my sweater. I gently stroked her dark hair, finding comfort in the rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing. Directly across from me sat Victoria. The spacious interior of the vehicle felt incredibly small with her in it. She had her tablet out again, typing away with furious precision, seemingly ignoring my presence. Yet I could feel the weight of her attention. Every few minutes, those sharp blue eyes would flick upwards, studying me through the dim lighting of the tinted windows. The air crackled with a strange, heavy tension every time our eyes met. I would quickly look away, my cheeks burning, while she remained cool, composed, and infuriatingly unreadable. "The estate is heavily secured," Victoria suddenly spoke, breaking the quiet hum of the engine. She set the tablet down and crossed her long legs, the movement drawing my eyes entirely against my will. "You will be given a keycard and a security detail whenever you traverse the grounds. Do not wander into the East Wing. That is my private workspace, and I do not tolerate interruptions." "Got it," I muttered, keeping my focus on Lily. "Stay out of the Alpha Billionaire's evil lair." Check. A sharp exhale of breath escaped Victoria's lips. It almost sounded like a laugh, though her face remained stoic. "You have a very sharp tongue for someone who was crying over an espresso machine an hour ago." "I wasn't crying," I defended defensively, my face flushing hot. "I was stressed." "You won't be stressed here," Victoria stated, her gaze turning intense, locking me in place. "Your only focus is her. Do your job well, Harper, and your life will be completely transformed." Before I could respond, the SUV slowed down. We were driving through Medina, the wealthiest neighborhood in the state, filled with sprawling, gated mansions hidden behind towering evergreen trees. The massive wrought-iron gates of the Sterling estate slowly swung open, revealing a property that looked more like a modern fortress than a home. It was a sprawling masterpiece of dark glass, steel, and gray stone, surrounded by perfectly manicured, lifeless gardens. It was beautiful in a stark architectural way, but it felt incredibly cold. There was no warmth here. No flowers, no bright colors, no signs that a child actually lived here. The SUV pulled up to the grand entrance, and the doors were opened by waiting staff standing perfectly still in the rain. "Welcome to your new reality, Harper," Victoria said, stepping out into the cold Seattle evening. I carefully scooped a sleeping Lily into my arms, stepping out of the vehicle and looking up at the imposing structure. As I followed the towering, intimidating CEO into the dark, silent mansion, I realized I hadn't just saved my café. I had just walked straight into the lion's den, and the lioness was watching my every move. End of Part 2. Part 3, The Gilded Cage and the First Spark. The heavy oak doors of the Sterling estate closed behind us with a resonant, final thud that echoed through the cavernous foyer. I stood entirely still, Lily's warm, sleeping weight anchored against my chest, and stared at my new reality. If the exterior of the mansion was a fortress, the interior was a museum of cold, untouchable wealth. The floors were vast expanses of gleaming white marble. A massive, cascading crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting fractured, icy light across walls adorned with abstract, monochromatic art. There wasn't a single stray shoe, not a forgotten toy, nor a framed family photograph anywhere in sight. It was pristine. It was flawless. It was utterly terrifying. Victoria stood a few paces ahead of me, shrugging off her damp, tailored blazer and handing it to an invisible, silent staff member who appeared from the shadows and vanished just as quickly. Beneath the blazer, she wore a crisp, silk button-down shirt that clung perfectly to her athletic frame. She ran a hand through her sleek, raven hair, finally loosening the severe bun. The dark strands tumbled down to her shoulders, framing her sharp jawline and giving her an edge of untamed, breathtaking elegance that made my throat go uncomfortably dry. "Sarah will show you to Lily's quarters," Victoria said, her back still turned to me. Her voice bounced off the marble, smooth and authoritative. "Dinner is served in the formal dining room at precisely 8 o'clock. Do not be late, Miss Davis. I abhor tardiness." Before I could formulate a sarcastic response, Victoria turned on her heel, her stilettos clicking rhythmically against the stone as she disappeared down a long, dimly lit corridor, the forbidden East Wing, I assumed. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "If you'll follow me, ma'am," Sarah, the tall blonde bodyguard, said politely. She had a kind face, though her posture was incredibly rigid. I adjusted Lily in my arms and followed Sarah up a sweeping, grand staircase. We walked through incredibly long hallways that felt more like a luxury hotel than a home. Finally, Sarah pushed open a set of double doors at the end of the hall. "These are Miss Lily's rooms," Sarah announced, stepping aside. "Your adjoining suite is through the door on the left." I stepped inside and felt my heart sink. The room was massive, beautifully decorated in shades of pale pink and stark white. There was a giant canopy bed, perfectly arranged rows of expensive, untouched dolls on pristine floating shelves, and a large mahogany desk that looked far too serious for a child. It looked exactly like a page out of a high-end architectural digest. It didn't look like a little girl lived here. It looked like a little girl was being stored here. I gently laid Lily down on the massive bed, carefully slipping off her wet pink cashmere coat and unlacing her small leather boots. I pulled the heavy silk duvet over her, watching as she instinctively curled into a tiny ball, her brow furrowed even in sleep. "It's okay, sweetie," I whispered, brushing a stray dark curl from her forehead. "I'm right here." "I expect her to be awake and presentable by 7, a cold, smooth voice announced from the doorway. I jumped, spinning around. Victoria was leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed over her chest. The silk shirt she wore was unbuttoned at the top, revealing a delicate gold chain resting against her collarbone. The relaxed posture was a stark contrast to the intense, predatory gaze fixed entirely on me. "She's exhausted," I countered, keeping my voice low so as not to wake the child. I stood up, crossing my arms to mirror her stance, though I felt significantly less intimidating in my flour-stained jeans and worn-out sweater. She ran through a rainstorm, had a massive panic attack, and hid in a stranger's café. Let her sleep. Victoria pushed herself off the doorframe and walked slowly into the room. The sheer physical presence of the woman was overwhelming. As she approached, the ambient temperature in the room seemed to drop, replaced by the intoxicating, heavy scent of cedarwood, dark amber, and power. "Lily operates on a strict schedule," Victoria stated, stopping on the opposite side of the bed. She looked down at her sleeping daughter, but her expression remained completely unreadable. "Structure is paramount. She has a Mandarin tutor at 7:30 in the morning, followed by classical piano and then cognitive behavioral therapy at noon. We do not deviate from the schedule." I stared at her, my jaw practically hitting the floor. "Mandarin? Piano? Victoria, she is 5 years old. And she hasn't spoken a single word in 8 months. Do you really think shoving her into intense tutoring sessions is going to magically fix whatever trauma she's dealing with?" The air in the room instantly evaporated. Victoria's head snapped up, her piercing icy blue eyes locking onto mine with a ferocity that made my breath hitch. I had crossed a line. I had used her first name, and I had directly challenged her authority in her own home. In a fraction of a second, Victoria moved. She rounded the edge of the bed with terrifying grace and speed. Before I could even think to step back, she was standing mere inches from me. I had to tilt my head back to look at her. She was so close I could feel the subtle heat radiating from her skin. "Listen to me very carefully, Harper," Victoria murmured, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous velvet rasp that vibrated straight through my chest. "You are here because my daughter has inexplicably chosen you. You are here to be a comfort to her. You are not here to critique my parenting, and you are certainly not here to tell me how to run my household." My heart was hammering against my ribs so violently I was sure she could hear it. Every instinct screamed at me to step back, to submit to the overwhelming, dominant energy she exuded. But my stubbornness, the same stubbornness that kept a failing cafe open for 6 months, refused to let me yield. I didn't back down. Instead, I lifted my chin, forcing myself to hold her intense, smoldering gaze. "I am here to do what's best for Lily," I whispered back fiercely, refusing to break eye contact. "And treating her like a malfunctioning piece of software that needs reprogramming, isn't it? She doesn't need a schedule, Ms. Sterling. She needs a mother. She needs warmth. And since you clearly don't know how to provide that, I suggest you step back and let me do the job you blackmailed me into doing." A thick, heavy silence crashed down upon us. We were standing chest to chest. I could see the subtle pulse jumping at the base of Victoria's throat. Her eyes darkened, the icy blue turning into a deep, stormy ocean. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of us moved. Tension between us was electric, crackling with an unspoken, volatile mixture of fury, challenge, and something entirely unnameable that sent a flush of heat creeping up my neck. Victoria's gaze flickered downward, tracing the line of my jaw, hesitating for a fraction of a second on my lips before snapping back to my eyes. The dominant CEO looked, for the very first time, momentarily thrown off balance. No one spoke to her like this. No one challenged her. And yet, she wasn't destroying me. "You walk a very dangerous line, little barista," Victoria murmured, leaning in just a fraction closer. Her warm breath fanned across my cheek, sending an involuntary shiver down my spine. "Do not push me. You have no idea what I am capable of." "Then show me," I breathed out, the words leaving my mouth before my brain could stop them. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, a genuine flash of shock breaking through her flawless, icy mask. A dark, thrilling smirk slowly began to form on her lips. Before she could reply, a soft whimper came from the bed. "Mommy." The heavy, intoxicating spell between us shattered instantly. Victoria stepped back, the cold, composed alpha mask slamming back into place so fast it gave me whiplash. We both turned toward the bed. Lily was sitting up, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She looked past Victoria entirely, her gaze locking onto me. "Mommy, where are we?" "It's too big." I immediately moved past Victoria, sitting on the edge of the mattress and pulling the tiny girl into my arms. "We're at your house, sweetie." "It's okay. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Over Lily's dark hair, I met Victoria's gaze. The billionaire CEO was standing rigid, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The look in her eyes was a devastating cocktail of jealousy, sorrow, and simmering anger. She watched her daughter cling to me, a stranger, with a profound longing she desperately tried to hide. "Dinner is at 8, Victoria repeated, her voice remarkably tight and devoid of emotion. "Do not be late." She turned and walked out of the room, the heavy double doors clicking shut behind her. As the silence settled back over the massive room, I held Lily tightly, my heart still racing from the proximity of Victoria Sterling. I had agreed to be a companion to a traumatized child. But as I stared at the closed door, my skin still tingling from the intense standoff, I realized the real danger wasn't losing my café. The real danger was the terrifying, undeniable pull I felt toward the cold, untouchable alpha who owned my life for the next 6 months. End of Part 3. Part 4, The Emerald Silk and the Midnight Truce. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway chimed softly, signaling 7:30. Lily had finally fallen back into a restless sleep, her small fingers still clutching the edge of my worn sweater. I gently untangled myself from her grip, replacing my arm with a soft plush rabbit I had found meticulously positioned on one of the floating shelves. I walked over to the massive ensuite bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. The reflection staring back at me was a disaster. I had flour dusted in my hairline, dark circles under my eyes from weeks of financial stress, and my clothes smelled entirely of stale espresso and rain. "Dinner is at precisely 8 o'clock, Victoria's cold voice echoed in my memory. I groaned, drying my face with a towel that felt softer than any item of clothing I owned. I couldn't go down to a billionaire's formal dining room looking like a street urchin, but all I had packed were jeans, oversized flannels, and a few basic t-shirts. A sharp, solitary knock at the door interrupted my panic. I opened it to find Sarah, the stoic blonde bodyguard, standing perfectly straight. In her hands, she held a large, matte-black garment box with a silver ribbon. "Miss Davis," Sarah said, her voice neutral. "Ms. Sterling anticipated you might not have had time to pack suitable evening attire during your abrupt departure. She requested I bring you this." I stared at the box suspiciously, making no move to take it. "Does she usually dress her hostages?" Sarah didn't crack a smile, but a faint glimmer of amusement danced in her eyes. Miss Sterling prefers a certain aesthetic in the formal dining room. I would advise putting it on, ma'am. She genuinely does detest tardiness. Reluctantly, I took the box. Thank you, Sarah. I placed the box on the edge of the bed and pulled the ribbon. Inside, resting on layers of crisp black tissue paper, was a dress. It wasn't just a dress, it was a weapon. It was made of heavy, liquid silk in a deep, striking shade of emerald green. It had a modest, elegant neckline, long sleeves, but the way the fabric felt in my hands told me it would cling to every single curve of my body. Tucked beneath the dress was a pair of classic black stiletto heels in my exact size. She ran a background check in 30 seconds. I reminded myself, my stomach doing a nervous flip. Of course she knows my shoe size. I stripped off my café uniform and slipped into the emerald silk. The fabric cascaded over my skin like cool water. I didn't have any makeup, so I simply brushed out my hair, letting the dark, wavy strands fall naturally over my shoulders. I stepped into the heels, took a deep breath, and looked in the full-length mirror. I looked completely out of my element, yet undeniably transformed. The deep green made my hazel eyes pop, and the cut of the dress gave me an air of sophisticated confidence I absolutely did not feel. "Okay, Harper," I whispered to my reflection. Into the lion's den. I woke Lily gently, helping her into a fresh pair of soft cotton pajamas since she refused to put on another stiff, formal dress. Holding her small hand, we navigated the labyrinth of the Sterling estate, finally arriving at the formal dining room right as the clock struck 8. The room was cavernous. A massive mahogany table stretched across the center, long enough to seat 20 people. It was illuminated by the soft glow of a crystal chandelier and dozens of tall, white candles. Sitting at the absolute head of the table was Victoria. She had changed out of her work clothes. She wore a sleek, tailored black evening suit, the jacket open to reveal a plunging silk camisole underneath. The severe bun was back, pulling the focus entirely to her sharp, devastatingly beautiful facial features. She was holding a crystal glass of amber liquid, swirling it slowly. As Lily and I entered, Victoria's icy blue eyes flicked upward. She stopped swirling her glass. For a terrifying, breathless second, she completely froze. Her gaze locked onto me, slowly dragging down from my face, over the curve of my waist in the emerald silk, down to the heels and back up again. The air in the massive room suddenly felt incredibly thin. Her eyes darkened, the icy blue turning into a smoldering, predatory storm. It was a look of pure, unadulterated consumption. She cleared her throat, seamlessly masking her reaction with her signature alpha coldness. "You are exactly on time, Miss Davis. A rare and appreciated trait." "I aim to please," I replied dryly, guiding Lily toward the chairs nearest to Victoria. However, the table was set with only 2 plates, one at the head and one at the absolute opposite end of the ridiculously long table. I stopped. "You expect us to eat 20 feet apart?" Victoria took a slow sip of her drink. "That is how the table is set." "Not anymore," I said. Ignoring the horrified look of the silent butler standing in the corner, I grabbed my silver cutlery and heavy ceramic plate, marching them all the way down to Victoria's end. I set them down at the seat directly to her right. Then I pulled out the chair to my right for Lily. Victoria's jaw clenched. "What are you doing?" "I am eating with Lily," I said simply, taking my seat and helping Lily into hers. "And unless you want to yell across a 20-foot piece of wood to ask me to pass the salt, I suggest we sit like actual human beings." Victoria stared at me, the muscle in her jaw jumping furiously. The scent of cedar wood and dark amber was overwhelming from this close. I could feel the intense heat of her anger, but beneath it, that thrilling, dangerous spark of challenge ignited again. She didn't order the butler to move my things. She simply gave a curt nod, and the staff began to serve the food. The first course was a delicate, unidentifiable piece of seared white fish resting on a bed of plain quinoa. Lily looked at the plate, her nose wrinkling in disgust. She pushed it away. "Lily, eat your fish," Victoria commanded softly, not looking up from her own plate. Lily shrank back in her chair, shaking her head. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Victoria's fork clinked sharply against her plate. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I will not tolerate disobedience at the dinner table. You will eat what the chef has prepared. It is strictly optimized for your nutritional needs. Tears immediately sprang to Lily's eyes. She turned to me, burying her face in my arm. Mommy, it smells yucky. I want a sandwich. She is not your mother, Victoria snapped, the sudden harshness in her voice causing both me and Lily to flinch. The billionaire squeezed her eyes shut for a fraction of a second, as if immediately regretting the outburst, but the damage was done. Lily began to sob quietly. Anger flared hot and bright in my chest. I pushed my own plate away and glared at Victoria. She is 5 years old, Victoria. She's exhausted, she's terrified, and you are trying to force-feed her steamed fish while barking orders at her like she's a misbehaving employee. Has it ever occurred to you to just ask her what she wants? Victoria's eyes blazed. I employ a world-class nutritionist to ensure. I don't care if you employ Gordon Ramsay. I interrupted, leaning closer to her. She needs comfort. She needs something familiar and safe. I turned my attention to the butler, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Excuse me. Do you have bread, butter, and cheese in that multi-million-dollar kitchen? Why, yes, miss, the butler stammered. Great. Please make a grilled cheese sandwich. Cut it into triangles. And bring a glass of milk. The butler hesitated, his eyes darting to his terrifying boss for permission. Victoria and I were locked in a silent, deadly battle of wills. We stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Her chest rose and fell with heavy, controlled breaths. She hated losing control. She hated being undermined. But as she glanced down at her daughter, who was trembling against my side, the ice in her eyes finally cracked. Do as Miss Davis says, Victoria ordered quietly. 10 minutes later, a perfectly golden brown grilled cheese sandwich arrived. Lily's tears stopped. She tentatively picked up a triangle and took a bite, a small, tired smile gracing her lips for the first time all day. I looked up to find Victoria watching the scene. Her expression was completely unreadable, but her eyes were fixed on the way I gently wiped a crumb from Lily's cheek. There was a profound, suffocating sadness radiating from the Alpha CEO, masked heavily by her pride. The rest of the meal passed in heavy silence. Hours later, the estate was completely still. I had tucked Lily into bed and sat with her until her breathing evened out into a deep sleep. My own mind, however, was racing. The adrenaline of the day, the sheer shock of my new reality, and the confusing magnetic pull I felt toward Victoria Sterling made sleep impossible. My throat was dry. Leaving the bedroom, I navigated the dark, silent hallways, trying to remember the way to the kitchen. The only illumination came from the moonlight filtering through the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows. As I rounded the corner near the grand foyer, I noticed a faint glow spilling out from a set of partially open double doors. It was the library. I tried to walk past quietly, but a voice stopped me dead in my tracks. You are wandering, Miss Davis. I turned slowly. Victoria was sitting in a high-backed leather armchair near a roaring fireplace. The room was lined with thousands of books, smelling of old paper and wood smoke. She had discarded her suit jacket. Her silk camisole clung to her, the firelight casting flickering, golden shadows across her skin. She held a fresh glass of whiskey, and the look in her eyes was heavy, exhausted, and incredibly dangerous. I was just looking for some water, I said, my voice coming out slightly breathless. Victoria gestured to a crystal pitcher on the small table next to her. There is water here. Every instinct told me to run back to my room. Entering that dimly lit, intimate space felt like walking into a trap. But my feet moved on their own, carrying me into the library. I poured myself a glass, acutely aware of Victoria's eyes tracking my every movement. You undermine my authority at every turn, Victoria murmured smoothly, staring into the flames of the fire. I advocate for Lily, I corrected softly, taking a sip of the ice-cold water. Someone has to. Victoria slowly turned her head to look at me. The vulnerability I had seen at the dinner table was gone, replaced by an intense, dark hunger. She stood up gracefully, setting her glass down on the table. She closed the distance between us with slow, deliberate steps until she was standing right in front of me. I backed up instinctively, but my shoulders hit the edge of a tall bookshelf. I was trapped. Victoria leaned in, placing one hand on the bookshelf right next to my head, effectively caging me in. The intoxicating scent of cedarwood, whiskey, and raw power enveloped me completely. My heart hammered against my ribs, loud enough that I was sure she could hear it. You are very brave, Harper, Victoria whispered, her gaze dropping to my lips. Her voice was a dark, husky rasp that sent a jolt of pure electricity straight to my core. But you are playing a game you do not understand. You think you can waltz into my home, wear my clothes, fix my daughter, and challenge me without consequences? I swallowed hard, trying desperately to maintain my composure while my entire body betrayed me, leaning subtly toward her warmth. I'm not playing a game, Victoria. Victoria's eyes snapped up to mine, blazing with a sudden, fierce heat. She lifted her free hand, her fingertips brushing lightly against my jawline. Touch was burning, sending a cascade of shivers down my neck. We will see about that, she murmured, her face so close I could feel the ghost of her lips against mine. Because if you continue to push me, little barista, I might just push back. End of Part 4. Part 5, The Flower War and the Cracking Ice. Because if you continue to push me, little barista, I might just push back. The husky, dangerous promise hung in the quiet library, heavy with an electric tension that made my skin flush beneath the emerald silk. Victoria's fingertips lingered on my jawline, a brand of heat against my skin. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, loud enough that I was certain she could feel it vibrating through the narrow space between us. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to submit, to apologize, to lower my eyes and let the Alpha CEO claim her victory. But as I looked into her stormy, smoldering blue eyes, a reckless surge of defiance ignited within me. I didn't step back. I didn't look away. Instead, I reached up and gently but firmly grasped her wrist, pulling her hand away from my face. I'm not afraid of you, Victoria, I whispered, my voice miraculously steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. And I don't scare easily. So if you're going to push, you'd better be ready for me to push right back. Victoria's eyes widened a fraction, a flash of genuine, unadulterated surprise breaking through her dominant facade. For a split second, the terrifying billionaire looked entirely disarmed. Taking advantage of her momentary shock, I ducked smoothly under her arm, escaping the cage she had built around me. I didn't run, though every nerve in my body told me to sprint. I walked toward the heavy double doors with measured, deliberate steps, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. Just as I reached the threshold, I paused and glanced back over my shoulder. Victoria was still standing by the bookshelf, watching me. The firelight cast long, flickering shadows across her face, masking her expression, but her posture was rigid, predatory. "Good night, Miss Sterling," I said quietly, before slipping out into the cold marble hallway. I didn't breathe properly until I was safely locked inside my suite. I leaned against the heavy wooden door, my legs suddenly trembling so violently I had to slide down to the floor. What had I just done? I had essentially challenged a woman who could destroy my entire life with a single phone call. Yet, as I touched my jaw where her fingers had rested, a treacherous thrill coursed through my veins. The next morning arrived with weak, gray sunlight filtering through the sheer curtains of my massive suite. I woke up to a tiny, warm weight pressing against my side. Lily had somehow migrated from her enormous, pristine bed into mine during the night. She was curled into a ball, one hand clutching the fabric of my t-shirt. I smiled, carefully brushing her dark hair back. "Morning, sweetie," I whispered as her big blue eyes fluttered open. She blinked sleepily, a small smile forming on her lips. "Morning, Mommy." Title still made my chest ache with a complex mixture of guilt and overwhelming protectiveness. "How did you sleep? Are you hungry?" Lily nodded vigorously, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "Hungry? But I don't want the green slime." I chuckled, knowing exactly what she meant. The green slime was undoubtedly some hyper-optimized nutritional smoothie dictated by Victoria's strict schedule. "No green slime today," I promised, swinging my legs out of bed. "Today we are having pancakes. Real, fluffy, buttery pancakes." Lily's eyes widened with pure delight. "With syrup?" "With a mountain of syrup," I confirmed. 10 minutes later, dressed in my usual comfortable jeans and a soft gray sweater, with Lily wearing her fuzzy pink slippers, we marched down the grand staircase. We were on a mission. Finding the kitchen in the Sterling estate was like navigating a luxury cruise ship. When we finally pushed through the swinging stainless steel doors, the sheer scale of the culinary space was staggering. Gleamed with industrial-grade appliances, vast white marble countertops, and copper pots hanging in perfect descending order. A tall man in a pristine white chef's coat was currently arranging kale leaves on a cutting board with surgical precision. He looked up as we entered, his eyes darting to Lily and then to me, absolute confusion etched onto his face. "Excuse me," the chef said, his French accent thick. "Miss Lily is not permitted in the kitchens. Her breakfast is currently being prepared according to the Alpha's strict dietary mandate." "Not today, chef," I said, offering him a polite but firm smile. I walked right past him, lifting Lily onto one of the massive marble islands. "Today, Lily and I are cooking." The chef looked as though I had just suggested burning the house down. "You are cooking? Mademoiselle, this is highly irregular. Ms. Sterling will be furious." "I must insist." "I take full responsibility," I interrupted, already opening cabinets to hunt for flour and sugar. "You can take a break. Have a coffee. We've got this." Took a solid 5 minutes of convincing, and a threat to call Victoria down myself, before the highly distressed chef threw his hands in the air and retreated to his office, muttering frantically in French. Once we were alone, I turned to Lily, a conspiratorial grin on my face. "All right, sous chef. Ready to make a mess?" Lily giggled, a sound so bright and sweet it completely warmed the cold, sterile room. For the next hour, the kitchen transformed from a pristine laboratory into a disaster zone. We found flour, eggs, milk, and vanilla extract. I let Lily crack the eggs, which resulted in a fair amount of shell in the bowl, but the triumphant look on her face was worth it. I showed her how to whisk the batter, her tiny tongue poking out the corner of her mouth in deep concentration. "More stirring," she demanded, her hands covered in sticky batter. "You got it, boss," I laughed, playfully dabbing a spot of flour onto her nose. Lily gasped, her eyes sparkling with mischief. She plunged her small hand into the flour bag and clumsily tossed a handful in my direction. Most of it hit my apron, but a puff of white dust caught my cheek. "Oh, it is on," I gasped mockingly. I grabbed a pinch of flour and flicked it back at her. The massive kitchen echoed with her joyous, uninhibited laughter. It was a beautiful, cascading sound that filled the cavernous space. We were completely lost in our own world, flipping uneven pancakes and creating a terrifying mess of syrup, flour, and butter. "Mommy, look! A heart!" Lily cheered, pointing at a deformed, lopsided pancake I had just slid onto her plate. "A perfect heart for a perfect girl," I smiled, leaning down to kiss the top of her flour-dusted head. Ahem. The sound cut through the kitchen like a crack of a whip. I froze. Lily's laughter abruptly died in her throat. I slowly turned toward the entrance. Victoria was standing just inside the swinging doors. She was dressed for war in a sharp-tailored navy blue suit, her hair pulled back into that severe, intimidating bun. 2 of her bodyguards stood nervously in the hallway behind her. Her icy blue eyes scanned the absolute devastation of her multi-million-dollar kitchen. She looked at the flour coating the black marble floor, the syrup dripping down the side of the island, and the chaotic stack of mismatched pancakes. Finally, her terrifying gaze locked onto me and Lily. The air grew so thick it was hard to breathe. Temperature plummeted. "What?" Victoria said, her voice a deadly, low vibration that promised absolute ruin. "Is the meaning of this?" I immediately stepped in front of Lily, wiping my flour-covered hands on my jeans, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "We're making breakfast. The schedule is taking a day off." Victoria's jaw clenched, the muscle ticking violently. She took a slow, menacing step into the kitchen. "I do not authorize deviations from the schedule, Miss Davis. My staff informed me you banished my head chef and hijacked my kitchen to create." She looked at the lopsided pancake heart with profound disgust. "This? It's not this," I snapped back, my protective instincts flaring over my fear. "It's called childhood, Victoria. Something your daughter desperately needs." Victoria's eyes darkened into a stormy, dangerous sea. She opened her mouth to verbally obliterate me, to remind me of the contract, to assert her dominant control over the situation. But before she could speak, a tiny voice broke the silence. "I made it for you." Victoria stopped. She looked past me. Lily had climbed down from the stool. She was holding a small, syrup-covered plate in her little hands. On it rested the lopsided, flour-dusted pancake heart. She walked slowly toward her mother, her head bowed slightly, but she held the plate up as an offering. "It's a heart," Lily whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Because you look sad sometimes." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Victoria. The untouchable, ruthless billionaire alpha froze completely. The anger drained out of her face, leaving behind a look of such profound, naked vulnerability it made my breath hitch. She stared down at the sticky plate, and then slowly up at her daughter's timid, hopeful face. For the first time since I met her, Victoria Sterling looked entirely lost. Her throat swallowed thickly. She slowly lowered herself into a crouch, ignoring the fact that her incredibly expensive suit pants were now resting in a puddle of spilled milk and flour. She didn't take the plate. Instead, she reached out with a trembling hand, her long, elegant fingers hesitating before gently brushing a smudge of flour from Lily's cheek. "Thank you, Lily," Victoria whispered, her voice cracking, stripped of all its corporate armor. It was so soft, so fragile, it sounded like it hurt her to speak. Lily offered a tiny, hesitant smile before turning and running back to hide behind my legs, clutching my jeans tightly. The loss of contact hit Victoria like a physical blow. She closed her eyes, a sharp exhale escaping her lips, before the ironclad mask of the Alpha CEO slammed viciously back into place. When she stood up, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by a terrifying, impenetrable ice. She didn't look at Lily again. She turned her piercing gaze to me. The raw intensity in her eyes made me shiver. "Clean this up," Victoria commanded, her voice smooth and devoid of any emotion. "And Miss Davis, when you are finished, you will report to my office in the East Wing. We are going to have a long conversation about boundaries." She turned on her heel and strode out of the kitchen, the doors swinging shut behind her, leaving me standing in the wreckage of our morning, my heart racing with dread and an undeniable, terrifying anticipation. End of Part 5. Part 6, The East Wing and the Alpha's Domain. The walk to the East Wing felt like a march to the executioner's block. After scrubbing the kitchen until it shone and leaving a surprisingly cheerful Lily in the capable, if slightly stiff, hands of Sarah the bodyguard, I found myself standing before the heavy mahogany double doors that separated Victoria Sterling's private sanctuary from the rest of the cold estate. "Do not wander into the East Wing," her warning from our first day echoed in my mind, sending a nervous flutter through my stomach. "I do not tolerate interruptions." I took a deep breath, smoothing down my flour-dusted jeans. I was a mess. My hair was tied up in a messy, chaotic bun, my sweater smelled distinctly of vanilla extract and burnt butter, and my heart was hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. I raised my fist and knocked twice. The sound was swallowed by the thick wood. "Enter." The voice was smooth, muffled, and entirely devoid of warmth. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped into the lion's den. If the rest of the house was a museum, Victoria's office was the command center of an empire. The room was massive, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a sprawling, uninterrupted view of the gray Seattle skyline and the turbulent waters of Lake Washington. The walls were painted a deep, oppressive slate, adorned only with a few abstract, sharp-angled paintings. The far end of the room, behind a desk carved from a single massive slab of black marble, sat Victoria. She had shed the ruined suit jacket from earlier. She was down to a crisp white silk button-down, the sleeves rolled up to her forearms, revealing the sleek silver face of a ridiculously expensive watch. She was typing furiously on a dual-monitor setup, her eyes darting across lines of data I couldn't even begin to comprehend. She didn't look up when I walked in. She didn't even pause her typing. The intentional dismissal was a power move, designed to make me feel small, insignificant, and desperate for her attention. It was a classic alpha tactic. I refused to play. Instead of hovering awkwardly by the door like a reprimanded schoolgirl, I walked straight into the room, my footsteps loud against the dark hardwood floor. I bypassed the two uncomfortable-looking visitor chairs placed deliberately far from her desk, and walked right up to the edge of the black marble. I crossed my arms and waited. 1 minute passed. Then 2. The only sounds in the room were the rapid, aggressive clacking of her keyboard and the soft hum of the central heating. The scent of cedarwood, dark amber, and strong black espresso permeated the air, intoxicating and heavy. Finally, Victoria hit the enter key with a sharp, definitive strike. She slowly leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, steepled her long, elegant fingers together, and lifted her gaze to meet mine. Her icy blue eyes were completely unreadable. The vulnerability I had witnessed in the kitchen, the fragile, shattered look of a mother receiving a gift from her child, was entirely gone. In its place was a wall of impenetrable, terrifying corporate ice. "You have a blatant disregard for authority, Miss Davis," Victoria began, her voice a low, velvet purr that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. "In the span of 24 hours, you have insulted me in my own home, countermanded my dietary protocols, banished my executive chef, and turned a multi-million-dollar kitchen into a biohazard." "It was just flour and syrup, Victoria," I countered, keeping my voice remarkably steady. "And a little bit of joy. Something this mausoleum of a house is desperately lacking." Victoria's jaw clenched. "You do not get to diagnose my household. You are here to fulfill a contract. A contract I purchased for a very steep price. I bought your time, your presence, and your compliance." "You bought a companion for your daughter," I corrected fiercely, leaning forward slightly, placing my hands on the edge of her cold marble desk. "You didn't buy a robot. You hired me because whatever you and your army of pediatric psychologists were doing wasn't working." She was silent for 8 months. 8 months, Victoria. And today she was laughing. She was playing. She was acting like a normal 5-year-old. "She is a sterling." Victoria's voice suddenly cracked like a whip, the sheer volume and force of it echoing off the glass windows. She stood up abruptly, the leather chair rolling back violently. "She is not some ordinary child who can afford to waste time making a mess. She requires structure. She requires discipline. The world she will inherit is ruthless, and I will not allow her to be weak." "She's 5. I yelled back, the frustration boiling over. I refused to cower, even as the imposing CEO towered over me from her side of the desk. "She doesn't need to be ruthless right now. She needs to be loved." The room fell dead silent. Victoria stared at me, her chest heaving with deep, controlled breaths. Her eyes were blazing, a stormy, terrifying blue that threatened to consume me whole. We were glaring at each other across the black marble, locked in a brutal battle of wills. Then, slowly, dangerously, Victoria began to move. She walked around the edge of the massive desk. Her movements were predatory, fluid and deliberate, like a panther circling its prey. Every step she took seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. My instincts screamed at me to step back, to create distance, but my stubborn pride nailed my feet to the floor. She didn't stop until she was standing mere inches from me. The height difference was suddenly glaringly obvious. I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. The heat radiating off her body was overwhelming, contrasting sharply with the icy look in her eyes. "You think you understand me," Victoria whispered, her voice dropping to a husky, dangerous register that vibrated straight through my chest. "You think you can psychoanalyze me based on a few interactions. You saw a moment of weakness in the kitchen, and you think that gives you leverage." "I don't want leverage," I breathed, my heart hammering so wildly I felt dizzy. "I want you to see her. Really see her. Did you see the look on her face when she handed you that plate? She was terrified you were going to reject it. She just wants her mother." A flash of raw, unfiltered pain crossed Victoria's face, so quick I almost missed it. Her hand twitched at her side as if she wanted to reach out before she forced it into a tight fist. "I provide for her," Victoria stated, though her voice lacked its usual unyielding conviction. "I ensure she has the best of everything. Security. Education. A future." "But you don't give her you," I said softly, the anger draining out of me, replaced by a profound sadness for both of them. "You're building a fortress around her, Victoria. But you're locking yourself outside of it." The air between us grew impossibly thick. Victoria's eyes darkened, dropping from my eyes to my lips. Tension in the room shifted, transforming from explosive anger into something entirely different. Something heavy, electric, and agonizingly intimate. She lifted a hand, her knuckles brushing agonizingly slowly against the side of my neck. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed by the touch, the scent of her, the overwhelming dominant energy she exuded. "You are crossing boundaries, Harper," she murmured, her thumb lightly tracing the line of my jaw. The touch was burning hot against my skin. "You are pushing yourself into spaces you do not belong. Maybe your boundaries are in the wrong place," I whispered back, my eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second as she stepped even closer, her body almost brushing against mine. "If I remove the boundaries..." Victoria's voice was barely a breath against my ear, the sheer proximity sending a jolt of pure fire straight to my core. "You have no idea what will happen to you. I am not a gentlewoman. I do not do things halfway. If you break down my walls, I will consume you entirely." I opened my eyes, meeting her intense, smoldering gaze. I should have been terrified. She was practically promising my destruction. But looking at the fierce, undeniable hunger in her eyes, all I felt was a thrilling, reckless pull. "I'm still here," I challenged softly. Victoria let out a ragged breath, her eyes burning with a mixture of fury and intense desire. She looked at my lips one last time, the internal struggle playing out clearly on her flawless features. For a second, I thought she was going to bridge the gap. I thought she was going to kiss me, to obliterate the space between us and prove exactly how ruthless she could be. Instead, the sharp, shrill ringing of the encrypted phone on her desk shattered the heavy silence. The spell broke instantly. Victoria flinched, stepping back as if she had been burned. The cold, impenetrable mask slammed back over her face so quickly it gave me whiplash. She ran a hand through her hair, smoothing it back before turning toward the desk. "Our conversation regarding boundaries is over, Miss Davis," Victoria said, her back completely turned to me as she picked up the receiver. Her voice was back to its standard, icy perfection. "You will not disrupt the schedule again. You are dismissed." I stood there for a moment, my skin still tingling where she had touched me, my mind reeling from the whiplash of her sudden withdrawal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to push her again. But the wall was back up, higher and thicker than before. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the office. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me, leaving me in the cold, silent hallway. I leaned back against the wood, letting out a long, shaky exhale. Victoria Sterling was a fortress, a terrifying, beautiful labyrinth of control and repressed emotion. And heaven help me, I was realizing I wouldn't stop until I found my way to the center of it. End of Part 6. Part 7, The Intruder and the Lioness. Cold, heavy click of the east wing doors shutting behind me echoed in my mind for the rest of the afternoon. My skin still hummed with the phantom heat of Victoria's touch, and the scent of cedarwood and dark amber seemed permanently etched into my senses. She had practically promised to consume me, only to freeze me out the very next second. I needed air. I needed to be as far away from the intoxicating, suffocating gravity of the Alpha CEO as possible. I found Lily in her massive bedroom, sitting entirely still on the edge of her pristine bed, staring blankly at a high-end educational tablet. The sight broke my heart all over again. "Hey, sweetie," I said softly, pushing the confusing tangle of my own emotions aside. It stopped raining. "How about we go on an adventure?" Lily looked up, her bright blue eyes widening. "An adventure?" "Outside." "Outside," I confirmed, grabbing a thick knitted cardigan from her terrifyingly organized closet. "I bet there are dragons hiding in those big gardens. Or at least some very grumpy frogs. Want to go find out?" A genuine, bright smile broke across her face. She dropped the tablet immediately and ran over, holding her arms up to be bundled into the sweater. The Sterling Estate gardens were exactly like the interior of the house, impeccably maintained, highly structured, and completely devoid of life. There were endless rows of perfectly trimmed evergreen hedges, geometric stone pathways, and massive slate fountains that hummed with a low mechanical efficiency. There were no bright flowers, no messy patches of dirt, no places for a child to simply be a child. "Okay, mission control," I whispered to Lily as we walked hand in hand down a long, sweeping stone staircase toward the lower lawns. "Our objective is to find something colorful. A flower, a cool rock, a very stylish beetle. Keep your eyes peeled." Lily giggled, her tiny hand gripping mine tightly. For the next hour, we marched through the sterile landscape. We played hide-and-seek behind the rigid topiaries, and I taught her how to balance on the stone curbs of the pathways. Her quiet, bubbling laughter was a stark, beautiful contrast to the heavy silence of the estate. Eventually, we wandered toward the far eastern edge of the property, near the massive wrought iron perimeter fence. Here, the manicured lawns gave way to a small, slightly overgrown patch of earth that the groundskeepers had clearly neglected. "Look!" Lily gasped, dropping to her knees in the damp grass. Nestled in the shadows of a towering oak tree was a single tiny patch of wild bluebells. They were vibrant and resilient, pushing their way through the unforgiving dirt. "Good eye, Scout," I smiled, kneeling beside her. "They're beautiful." Lily reached out with a delicate finger, gently touching a blue petal. "They match Mommy's eyes," she whispered. My chest tightened. Even after all the coldness, the rigid schedules, and the emotional distance, this little girl still constantly looked for pieces of her mother in the world. Before I could reply, the crunch of gravel shattered the peaceful moment. I looked up. About 50 yards away, a sleek silver sports car was rolling slowly up the private side driveway that led directly to the east wing entrance. The car came to a halt and the driver's side door swung open. A woman stepped out. She was tall, dressed in a sharp crimson power suit that stood out violently against the gray landscape. Her blonde hair was cropped into a severe asymmetrical bob, and she wore a pair of oversized designer sunglasses. She held a sleek leather briefcase in one hand. I didn't know who she was, but my instincts instantly flared. There was a sharp, predatory arrogance in the way she moved. The woman paused, pushing her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose. Her gaze swept over the lawn, locking directly onto me and Lily. A cruel, venomous smile spread across her lips. Instead of walking toward the east wing doors, she adjusted her grip on her briefcase and began to march across the grass, heading straight for us. "Well, well, well," the woman called out as she closed the distance, her voice a piercing nasal drawl. "If it isn't the little Sterling ghost." I thought Victoria locked you up in a tower. Lily froze completely. The joy vanished from her face in a split second, replaced by a mask of absolute, paralyzing terror. She scrambled backward, abandoning the bluebells, and pressed her small body entirely against my side, burying her face in my coat. She was trembling violently. I stood up immediately, stepping firmly in front of Lily, acting as a human shield. "Can I help you?" I demanded, keeping my voice hard and entirely devoid of politeness. The woman stopped a few feet away, looking me up and down with blatant disgust. "And who are you supposed to be? A new nanny? A glorified babysitter?" Victoria must be truly desperate if she's hiring the local riffraff to manage her defective heir. The word defective hit the air like a physical slap. Red-hot anger exploded in my chest, completely incinerating any sense of caution. "You need to turn around and walk away," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous warning. I didn't care if this woman was a billionaire, a board member, or the Queen of England. "Right now," the woman scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. Do you have any idea who I am? I am Evelyn Vance. I sit on the board of Sterling Tech. I've known Victoria since before she built this ridiculous fortress. I simply wanted to say hello to the little mute. It's a tragedy, really. Such a weak link in such a strong bloodline." Evelyn took another step forward, reaching a hand out as if to bypass me and grab Lily. She didn't make it. I moved faster than I thought possible. I slapped her hand away with a sharp, echoing crack, stepping aggressively into her personal space. Evelyn gasped in shock, stumbling backward a half step. "I said back up," I snarled, my heart pounding with a fierce, feral protectiveness. "If you take one more step toward this child, I will drag you off this property myself. I don't care who you are. You do not speak to her, you do not look at her, and you sure as hell don't touch her. Are we clear?" Evelyn's face flushed a deep, ugly red. Her mouth opened and closed in pure outrage. You insolent little, I will have Victoria fire you before the day is out. I will ruin. You will do absolutely nothing." The voice sliced through the cold afternoon air like a freshly sharpened guillotine blade. Both Evelyn and I snapped our heads toward the sound. Victoria was standing on the stone terrace overlooking the lawn. She had clearly just stepped out of the east wing. She wasn't running, but she was descending the stone steps with a terrifying, predatory speed. The air pressure around us seemed to plummet. Evelyn's arrogant posture instantly withered. "Victoria, darling, I was just—" Silence. Victoria didn't shout, but the sheer, dominant authority in that single word was paralyzing. Victoria stopped beside me. She didn't look at Evelyn right away. Instead, her icy blue eyes immediately dropped to Lily, who was still weeping silently into my coat, and then shifted to me. She took in my rigid, protective stance, the way my body was angled entirely to shield her daughter. A profound, earth-shattering emotion flared in Victoria's eyes. It was a mixture of absolute fury directed at Evelyn and a dark, awestruck reverence directed entirely at me. Slowly, Victoria turned her gaze to Evelyn Vance. Temperature dropped another 10 degrees. "Evelyn," Victoria said, her voice a deadly, velvet whisper. "You have exactly 3 seconds to explain why you are on my private estate, bypassing main security and approaching my daughter." Evelyn swallowed hard, her previous bravado completely evaporating under the alpha's terrifying scrutiny. "Victoria, the quarterly meeting is tomorrow. I brought the revised projections. Your security let me through the side gate because I had an appointment with your secretary. I saw Lily and wanted to say hello. Your help here assaulted me." "My help," Victoria repeated slowly, the word dripping with venom, "was doing exactly what she is meant to do. She was protecting what is mine." Victoria stepped closer to Evelyn, towering over the other woman. The sheer physical menace radiating from the billionaire was awe-inspiring. "You will leave the projections in your car," Victoria commanded, her eyes burning like blue fire. You will get back into the driver's seat. You will drive off my property. And if you ever attempt to approach my daughter again, I will not simply remove you from the board, Evelyn. I will dismantle your entire life. I will buy your family's company, liquidate it, and salt the earth where it stood. Do you understand me? Evelyn was pale, shaking slightly. She knew Victoria wasn't making an empty threat. Victoria Sterling was a woman who burned empires to the ground for sport. Yes, Victoria, Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. Get out. Evelyn practically ran back to her silver sports car. She threw her briefcase into the passenger seat, peeled out of the driveway, and vanished down the long, tree-lined road. The heavy silence of the estate rushed back in, broken only by Lily's muffled sniffles. I immediately dropped to my knees, pulling Lily into a tight embrace. It's okay, baby. She's gone. She's far away. I've got you. Lily clung to my neck, her small body shaking. Scary lady, she sobbed softly. Like the cars. Like the black cars. My blood ran cold. The women in the black cars from the day she ran into my café. Evelyn Vance was connected to whatever had traumatized this little girl. I looked up. Victoria was standing over us, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. The terrifying rage was slowly fading from her face, replaced by that same agonizing, helpless vulnerability I had seen in the kitchen. She looked at her daughter, desperately wanting to reach out but visibly restraining herself. Instead, Victoria sank to her knees right there in the damp grass, ruining her expensive trousers. She was now at eye level with me and Lily. She is safe, Harper, Victoria said softly, her icy eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that stole my breath. Because of you. She shouldn't have to be protected from your own board members, Victoria, I said, my voice trembling with leftover adrenaline and anger. What is going on? Why is she so terrified? Victoria stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. The walls were down. The alpha mask was completely shattered, leaving only a fiercely protective, deeply wounded woman staring back at me. She reached out, but not for Lily. Victoria's warm, long fingers gently brushed a stray lock of hair away from my face. Her touch was completely different from the aggressive dominance in her office. It was reverent. It was dangerously tender. You stood between my child and a threat, Victoria whispered, her voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Her thumb traced my cheekbone, sending a cascade of heat straight to my heart. You didn't hesitate. You didn't cower. You fought for her. I told you, I breathed, unable to look away from the magnetic pull of her eyes. I protect what I care about. Victoria's gaze dropped to my lips, the air between us suddenly crackling with a heavy, overwhelming electricity. The space between us felt impossibly small. And I, Victoria murmured, leaning in until I could feel her warm breath against my skin, and beginning to realize exactly how dangerous it is to care about you, Harper. End of Part 7. Part 8, The Velvet Night and the Hidden Scars. And I, Victoria murmured, leaning in until I could feel her warm breath against my skin, and beginning to realize exactly how dangerous it is to care about you, Harper. The world completely stopped spinning. The damp chill of the Seattle afternoon, the sprawling manicured lawns, the retreating roar of Evelyn Vance's sports car, all of it faded into absolute nothingness. There was only the intense, burning sapphire of Victoria's eyes and the ghosting touch of her thumb against my cheekbone. My heart was beating a frantic, deafening rhythm against my ribs. I parted my lips to speak, to challenge her, to ask her what she meant, but my voice had completely abandoned me. The untouchable Alpha CEO was looking at me not as an employee, not as a contracted companion, but as a woman who had just profoundly shifted the axis of her world. A soft, trembling whimper broke the spell. Lily shifted in my arms, her small hands clutching my coat tighter. The sound acted like a physical jolt to both of us. Victoria pulled her hand back as if my skin had suddenly caught fire. She squeezed her eyes shut, a jagged breath escaping her lips as she violently wrestled her composure back into place. When she opened her eyes, the terrifying, unyielding CEO was back, though the ice in her gaze was significantly thinner than before. "Take her inside," Victoria commanded softly, standing up and brushing the damp grass from her ruined trousers. She didn't offer a hand to help me up, but she lingered, her eyes tracking my every movement as I gathered Lily into my arms. "Have Sarah run a warm bath for her. I will handle the fallout of Evelyn's intrusion." "Victoria," I said, pausing before I turned toward the estate. "Evelyn called her a defective heir. She mentioned black cars. What happened 8 months ago?" Victoria's jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might shatter. A shadow of pure, murderous rage darkened her features, directed entirely at the memory I had just invoked. "Not now, Harper," she said, her voice a heavy, impenetrable velvet. "Go inside. Keep her safe. I will come to your quarters tonight." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of soothing rituals. The hot bath seemed to wash away some of Lily's immediate terror. I wrapped her in her softest pajamas, combed her dark hair, and sat with her in the massive canopy bed, reading 3 different fairy tales until her exhausted blue eyes finally drifted shut. Even in sleep, her tiny hand kept reaching out to grasp the edge of my sleeve, anchoring herself to my presence. It was past 10 o'clock when the estate finally settled into a heavy, oppressive silence. The storm outside had returned, rain lashing rhythmically against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my adjoining suite. I was sitting in an oversized velvet armchair near the window, staring out into the dark, churning waters of Lake Washington. I had changed into a simple pair of gray sweatpants and a worn-out, oversized college hoodie. My right hand, the one I had used to violently smack Evelyn's hand away, was throbbing with a dull, persistent ache. I rubbed my knuckles gently, my mind replaying the explosive confrontation in the garden on an endless loop. "I am beginning to realize exactly how dangerous it is to care about you." The memory of Victoria's husky whisper sent a fresh wave of heat pooling in my stomach. She was a paradox. A ruthless titan who bought people to solve her problems, yet a desperately wounded mother who fell to her knees in the dirt because someone finally protected her child. A soft, deliberate knock at my door shattered the quiet. My breath hitched. I stood up, smoothing down my oversized hoodie in a vain attempt to look presentable, and opened the door. Victoria stood in the dimly lit hallway. Corporate armor was entirely gone. She wore a pair of loose, dark silk trousers and a matching unbuttoned silk robe over a simple black camisole. Her raven hair fell in loose, damp waves around her shoulders, framing a face that looked bone-tired. In one hand, she carried a small, vintage leather medical kit. In the other, 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of expensive-looking amber liquid. Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped past me into the room. The intoxicating, heavy scent of cedarwood, expensive soap, and dark whiskey immediately filled my space. "Close the door," she said quietly. I obeyed, my heart kicking up its frantic pace. I watched as she set the glasses and the bottle down on a small side table, followed by the leather kit. She turned to me, her eyes sweeping over my exceptionally casual attire. A faint, almost imperceptible ghost of a smile touched the corner of her lips. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to the edge of my unmade bed. "I'm fine," I deflected, crossing my arms defensively over my chest. "If you're here to fire me for assaulting a board member, you could have just sent an email." Victoria let out a low, rough sigh. She closed the distance between us, her movements predatory but stripped of their usual aggression. She gently reached out and took my right hand, her long, cool fingers wrapping around my wrist. A jolt of electricity shot up my arm at the contact. "You strike with a significant amount of force for a barista," she murmured, guiding me toward the bed until the back of my knees hit the mattress and I had no choice but to sit. Victoria didn't sit beside me. She lowered herself gracefully to the floor, kneeling between my parted knees. The intimacy of the position was staggering. I gasped softly, my hands instinctively gripping the edge of the mattress. She was entirely too close. Her face was perfectly aligned with my chest, and when she looked up at me, her icy blue eyes were heavy with a dark, consuming intensity. She opened the leather kit with one hand, her other hand still holding my injured wrist with a firm, inescapable grip. She extracted a small jar of ointment and a roll of soft gauze. "Evelyn Vance is a parasite," Victoria began, her voice a low vibration that hummed in the quiet room. She dipped 2 fingers into the ointment and began to massage it gently into my bruised knuckles. Contrast of her cool skin against the throbbing heat of my hand was agonizingly good. "She leads a faction of the board that has been trying to oust me as CEO for 3 years. They believe I am too autocratic, too unyielding." "Are you?" I asked softly, unable to look away from the way her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders. Victoria paused, her eyes snapping up to meet mine. "In business? Absolutely. But 8 months ago, their corporate sabotage escalated. They didn't just want to ruin my reputation. They wanted to break me, to prove that I was emotionally unstable and unfit to lead Sterling Tech." My chest tightened. The gentle rhythm of her thumb massaging my knuckles stopped. "I was running late for a gala," Victoria whispered, her gaze dropping to my hand. The absolute devastation in her voice shattered my heart. Lily was in the back of my primary vehicle with her nanny and my head of security. I was supposed to be in that car, but I took a separate vehicle directly from the office. She swallowed hard, the muscles in her elegant throat working visibly. "They were ambushed," Victoria continued, her voice turning terribly, terrifyingly cold. 3 unmarked black SUVs trapped my vehicle on a secluded access road. They ripped the doors open. They dragged my security chief out and beat him unconscious. They dragged the nanny out. And then they just stood there, staring at Lily. For 10 minutes, they kept a 5-year-old girl trapped in a car, screaming for her mother, surrounded by masked strangers. And then they simply drove away. Tears pricked my eyes. A cold horror washed over me. "Why?" I breathed. "Why didn't they take her?" "Because kidnapping is a federal offense that brings the FBI," Victoria said, looking up at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed, furious tears. "Psychological torture is much harder to prove. They wanted to send a message. They wanted to show me that they could touch the only thing in this world I care about, and I wouldn't be able to stop them." "Evelyn," I whispered, the puzzle pieces clicking together. "I couldn't prove it was her faction," Victoria stated, her grip on my hand tightening slightly. "But ever since that night, Lily hasn't spoken a word. She became terrified of the dark, of loud noises, of cars. And she became terrified of me because I wasn't there to stop it. I built this fortress. I implemented the schedules. I hired the guards. I thought if I controlled every single variable of her life, she would finally be safe. But instead, you just locked her in a different kind of cage," I finished softly. Victoria didn't argue. She lowered her head, resting her forehead against my injured hand. The proud, untouchable alpha was practically bowing to me, utterly defeated by the weight of her own guilt. Without thinking, I freed my left hand from the mattress and reached out. I threaded my fingers through her thick, dark hair. She flinched in surprise at the contact, but then leaned into my touch, a ragged, shuddering exhale leaving her lips. "You didn't break her, Victoria," I whispered gently, stroking her hair. "You were just trying to survive. But you can't protect her by freezing the whole world out. You have to let the warmth back in." Victoria slowly lifted her head. Proximity was devastating. Our faces were mere inches apart. I could feel the heat radiating from her skin, could see the slight parting of her red lips, could drown in the deep, stormy depths of her eyes. "And what if I don't know how?" she whispered, her voice a husky, desperate plea. "What if I am entirely composed of ice, Harper? What if I destroy you too?" "Then let me melt you," I breathed recklessly, all my defensive walls crumbling into dust. Victoria's eyes widened, a flare of pure, unadulterated fire erupting in the icy blue. The air in the room instantly evaporated. She let go of my hand. Her long fingers tangled into the fabric of my oversized hoodie at my waist, gripping it with a fierce, possessive strength. She pulled herself up from the floor, rising until she was standing between my knees, towering over me in the dim light. "You have no idea what you are asking for," Victoria murmured, her voice dropping a full octave, dark and thrumming with a predatory hunger that made my toes curl. She stepped closer, forcing me to lean back slightly on my hands. "If I let you in, Harper, I will never let you go. You will be mine. Completely." My breath hitched. The warning was absolute, heavy with the weight of her dominant nature. She was giving me one final chance to run, to retreat to the safety of my failing cafe and my ordinary life. I looked up at the terrifying, beautiful Lioness who had just laid her darkest secrets at my feet. I didn't want to run. I reached up, my hands wrapping around the lapels of her silk robe, and pulled her down toward me. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered against her lips. End of Part 8. Part 9, The Avalanche and the Reckoning. The moment my lips met hers, the entire world outside the walls of the Sterling estate ceased to exist. Victoria didn't just kiss me, she consumed me. The agonizing restraint she had held onto for the past 24 hours completely shattered. With a low, desperate groan that vibrated against my mouth, she shifted her weight, crowding me backward until my shoulders hit the soft mattress of the bed. Her hands, previously gripping the fabric of my hoodie, slid upward, long fingers tangling fiercely into my hair to hold me in place. She tasted like expensive whiskey, cedarwood, and absolute ruin. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of fire and ice, a battle of dominance and surrender. Every instinct in my body told me to let her take control, to melt entirely into the overwhelming, predatory gravity she commanded. But I had promised to push back. I wrapped my arms around her neck, pulling her impossibly closer, answering her fierce urgency with a desperate, burning heat of my own. I felt her shudder against me. The untouchable alpha CEO, the woman who terrified boardrooms and commanded empires, was trembling in my arms. "Harper," she breathed, tearing her lips away for a fraction of a second, her forehead resting heavily against mine. Her chest heaved, her breath mingling with mine in the quiet room. "You are going to be the death of me." "Then let's go down together," I whispered, capturing her lips again. This time, the kiss shifted. The frantic, aggressive edge melted away, replaced by a profound, agonizingly slow exploration. Her lips moved against mine with a devastating tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. It was a silent confession of all the grief, the fear, and the crushing loneliness she had endured for the past 8 months. I held her tight, anchoring her, pouring every ounce of warmth and comfort I had left into her bruised soul. Eventually, the sheer emotional exhaustion caught up to both of us. Victoria slowly pulled back, her eyes heavy and dark with a mixture of desire and of vulnerability that took my breath away. She didn't leave. Instead, she collapsed beside me on the massive bed, pulling me securely against her side. I rested my head on her chest, listening to the rapid, strong beat of her heart beneath the silk camisole. Her arm was wrapped protectively around my waist, holding me as if I might vanish into thin air if she let go. "Stay," she murmured into the darkness, her voice thick with sleep. "I'm right here," I promised, closing my eyes as the storm raged on outside the window. When I woke the next morning, the space beside me was empty, though the sheets still carried the intoxicating scent of dark amber. I sat up, blinking away the sleep, and found Victoria standing near the floor-to-ceiling window. The vulnerable woman from the night before was completely gone. She was dressed for war. She wore a flawlessly tailored pitch-black power suit with a crimson silk blouse beneath it. Her raven hair was pulled back into its severe signature bun, her posture rigid and unyielding. She was on her encrypted phone, speaking in rapid, flawless French, her tone colder than absolute zero. When she finished the call, she slipped the phone into her pocket and turned to face me. "Good morning," she said, her voice smooth and professional, though a faint heat flickered in her icy blue eyes as she looked at me sitting in her bed. Good morning, I replied, pulling the duvet up slightly, suddenly hyper-aware of my messy hair and oversized hoodie. You're up early. The board meeting is at 9, Victoria stated, checking the silver watch on her wrist. The air around her was crackling with a terrifying, lethal energy. Evelyn Vance has been preparing a coup for months. She intends to use Lily's condition and my supposed inability to manage my household as leverage to force a vote of no confidence. My stomach dropped. She's going to use what happened yesterday in the garden? She will try, Victoria corrected, a slow, dangerous, and utterly thrilling smirk curling on her red lips. But Evelyn made a fatal miscalculation. She assumed my grief made me blind. For 8 months, my private security team has been quietly tracing the financial routing numbers of the shell companies that hired the mercenaries who ambushed my car. I gasped. You found the proof. Victoria's eyes darkened into a stormy, violent sea. I found the money trail leading directly to Evelyn's offshore accounts. Today, I am not just going to fire her from my board, Harper. I am going to hand a mountain of federal evidence to the FBI agents currently waiting in my private conference room. By noon, she will be in handcuffs, and her entire faction will be liquidated. I stared at her, completely awestruck. The sheer ruthlessness of her intellect was terrifying, yet undeniably magnificent. She wasn't just a CEO, she was an apex predator protecting her territory. Victoria walked over to the bed, leaning down slightly. She didn't kiss me, the corporate armor was fully engaged, but she reached out, her cool fingers lightly brushing my cheek. Keep Lily inside today, Victoria commanded softly, the alpha slipping into her tone. Sarah has instructed the perimeter guards to lock down the estate until I return. Do not open the doors for anyone. I nodded, leaning into her touch for a brief second. Go get them, Victoria. And then come back to us. The words to us hung in the air. Victoria's breath hitched slightly. The ice in her eyes completely fractured for a fleeting moment, revealing the desperate, loving woman underneath. I always will, she whispered. The day passed in an agonizingly slow crawl. The atmosphere in the Sterling estate was thick with tension. Sarah and the other bodyguards paced the hallways with rigid urgency, their earpieces buzzing with constant updates. I kept my promise to Victoria, turning my suite into a fortress of distraction for Lily. I raided the estate's massive, untouched craft room, dragging canvases, watercolors, and brushes back to our quarters. If I couldn't take Lily out into the world, I was going to bring the color to her. We spent hours painting. We painted wonky bluebells, massive yellow suns, and highly inaccurate dragons. For the first time since she arrived in my cafe, Lily didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't flinch at the sound of the wind against the glass. She was completely absorbed in the messy, joyful act of creating. Her small hands were covered in green and purple paint, and a bright streak of pink crossed her forehead. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Sarah knocked sharply on the open door of the suite. Miss Davis, Sarah said, holding a silver tablet in her hands. The stoic bodyguard actually looked slightly flushed. You need to see this. The alpha is on the financial news networks. I dropped my paintbrush, wiping my hands on a towel as I rushed over. Lily stayed at the table, happily attempting to mix every color on her palette into a giant, muddy puddle. Sarah handed me the tablet. It was a live broadcast from outside the towering glass structure of Sterling Tech headquarters. The scene was absolute chaos. Federal agents in windbreakers were escorting a pale, horrified-looking Evelyn Vance out of the building in handcuffs, surrounded by a swarm of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Camera then cut to a press podium inside the lobby. Victoria stood behind the microphones. She looked like an absolute goddess of vengeance. The black suit and crimson blouse commanded the entire room. She didn't look flustered, she didn't look angry, she looked untouchable. Sterling Tech has always operated with a zero-tolerance policy regarding corporate espionage and criminal endangerment. Victoria's smooth, icy voice flowed through the tablet speakers, silencing the room of journalists instantly. Today, a faction of rogue board members, led by Evelyn Vance, was dismantled. They orchestrated a campaign of psychological terror against my family to manipulate stock prices and force a change in leadership. The reporters erupted into frantic shouting, but Victoria merely raised a single, perfectly manicured hand, and they quieted down again. Let this serve as a definitive message to anyone who believes that a mother's love for her child is a vulnerability, Victoria continued, looking directly into the camera lens. Her icy blue eyes seemed to pierce straight through the screen, reaching across the city, finding me in the quiet of her estate. It is not a weakness. It is the absolute foundation of my strength. Sterling Tech remains secure, and my family remains utterly untouchable. She stepped away from the podium, ignoring the barrage of questions, and vanished behind a wall of her personal security. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, a fierce, protective pride swelling in my chest. "She did it," Sarah murmured, a rare smile breaking across the bodyguard's face. The Alpha completely destroyed them. It was well past 8 o'clock when the heavy oak doors of the East Wing finally opened. The estate was quiet. Lily and I had moved down to the grand living room, camping out on the plush, white rugs with our dried paintings spread out around us. I was reading a book, while Lily was curled against my side, tracing the outline of a painted dragon. I looked up as the footsteps echoed against the marble. Victoria walked into the living room. She looked exhausted. The sharp power suit was slightly wrinkled, her tie was loosened, and she had finally taken her hair out of the bun, letting the dark waves fall around her shoulders. She stopped at the edge of the rug, taking in the scene. The messy paints, the scattered canvases, and the two of us sitting in the middle of her pristine, untouchable living room. I smiled softly, putting my book down. "Welcome home." Victoria's icy eyes softened entirely. The heavy burden she had been carrying for 8 months seemed to physically lift off her shoulders. She took a step toward us, her gaze fixed entirely on me, filled with an overwhelming, consuming affection. But before I could stand up to greet her, Lily moved. The little girl scrambled up from the floor. She didn't run behind my legs. She didn't hide her face in my sweater. Instead, she stood perfectly still, looking at the towering, intimidating CEO. Victoria froze, her breath hitching in her throat as she looked down at her daughter. Lily took one tentative step forward. Then another. She walked across the ruined white rug, stopping right in front of Victoria's polished black stilettos. She reached her small, paint-covered hands up, grabbing the fabric of Victoria's expensive black trousers. Victoria dropped to her knees instantly, not caring about the paint, not caring about the floor. She hovered her hands over Lily, terrified that any sudden movement might break the fragile moment. Lily looked straight into Victoria's icy blue eyes. "Mommy," Lily whispered, her voice clear and unbroken. "You came back." A choked, heartbreaking sob ripped from Victoria's throat. The ice didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. She wrapped her arms tightly around her daughter, pulling Lily into a fierce, desperate embrace, burying her face in the little girl's dark hair as she wept openly. Lily hugged her back, resting her chin on Victoria's shoulder, and looked over at me with a small, beautiful smile. I sat back, tears streaming down my own face, watching the fortress finally crumble to the ground. End of Part 9. Part 10, The Vanilla Scent and the Forever Contract. For a long, beautiful hour, I simply sat on the paint-stained rug and watched a miracle unfold. Victoria Sterling, the ruthless titan of the corporate world, sat on the floor of her ruined living room, holding her daughter and weeping. They spoke in hushed, fragile whispers, relearning the sound of each other's voices. Lily told her mother about the dragons we had painted, and Victoria listened with a profound, breathless reverence, as if her 5-year-old was reciting the secrets of the universe. I felt a warm tear slide down my own cheek. My heart was completely full, swelling with a fierce pride for both of them. The fortress had fallen. The cold, impenetrable ice that had suffocated this family for 8 months was finally gone, washed away by a child's simple, brave forgiveness. But as I watched them, a quiet, heavy ache began to settle in the pit of my stomach. I slowly stood up, careful not to make a sound. Neither of them noticed. They were completely wrapped in their own restored universe. I took a step back, the chill of the marble floor seeping through my socks as I moved out of the living room and into the grand, dimly lit hallway. The reality of my situation hit me with the force of a physical blow. I will purchase the deed to this building. In return, you belong to me for the next 6 months. You will coax her out of her shell. You will ensure she continues to speak. Terms of Victoria's ruthless, blackmail-laced contract echoed in my mind. I had fulfilled my purpose. Lily was speaking. People who had traumatized her were currently sitting in federal custody, their assets frozen, their power completely destroyed. Victoria didn't need a buffer anymore. She didn't need a glorified babysitter to coax her daughter out of the dark. She was the alpha again, but this time her home was secure. I walked up the grand staircase, the silence of the estate feeling entirely different now. It wasn't oppressive, it was peaceful. But it was a peace that no longer required my presence. When I reached my suite, I didn't turn on the main lights. I pulled my 2 worn-out duffel bags from the back of the massive closet and tossed them onto the pristine white duvet. I began to pack mechanically. I folded my oversized college hoodies, my faded jeans, and my flower-stained café aprons. I left the beautiful emerald green silk dress hanging in the closet. That belonged to Victoria's world, not mine. I zipped up the first bag, my vision blurring slightly with unshed tears. I was falling hopelessly, terrifyingly in love with Victoria Sterling. But she was a billionaire CEO, and I was a barista drowning in debt. I wouldn't stay here and wait for her to transition me from an essential companion to a disposable employee. My pride, the only thing I truly owned, wouldn't allow it. What exactly do you think you are doing? The voice sliced through the quiet room, low, dangerous, and vibrating with an emotion I had never heard from her before. Absolute panic. I spun around. Victoria stood in the doorway. She had taken off her suit jacket and tie, standing in just her tailored black trousers and the crimson silk blouse. Her dark hair was wildly disheveled from Lily's small hands, and her eyes, those sharp, terrifying, icy blue eyes, were locked onto my duffel bags with a look of pure devastation. "I'm packing," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, even though my hands were trembling. I turned my back to her, picking up a stack of t-shirts. "Lily is asleep? In her own bed. She asked for you," Victoria stated, her footsteps heavy and deliberate as she stepped into the room. "I told her you were resting. I did not tell her you were attempting to sneak out into the night like a thief." "I'm not sneaking out," I countered, throwing the shirts into the second bag. "I was going to say goodbye in the morning. But my job here is done, Victoria. Evelyn is in jail. Lily is speaking. She has her mother back. You don't need a contracted companion anymore. I'm nullifying the agreement. You can keep the cafe deed. I'll figure something else out." I reached for the zipper of the bag, but before my fingers could touch the metal, a warm, strong hand clamped firmly around my wrist. Victoria spun me around, pushing me gently but firmly until the back of my knees hit the edge of the mattress. She stepped entirely into my space, trapping me between her body and the bed. The scent of cedarwood and dark amber washed over me, intoxicating and overwhelmingly familiar. Her chest was heaving. The Alpha CEO mask was completely gone, leaving only the fierce, desperate woman underneath. "Nullifying the agreement?" Victoria hissed, her voice a rough, velvet rasp. She didn't let go of my wrist. Her grip was tight, possessive, anchoring me to her. "You think you can just walk into my life, dismantle every single wall I have spent my entire existence building, bring my daughter back to me, set my heart on fire, and then just pack a bag?" My breath hitched in my throat. I looked up into her stormy eyes, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. "Victoria!" "No!" she interrupted fiercely, her free hand coming up to cut my face. Her thumb traced my jawline, burning my skin. "You do not get to leave, Harper. I have spent my entire life optimizing my world. I calculate risks. I eliminate variables. I do not rely on anyone. But when you stood in my garden and shielded my daughter from a threat, when you kissed me in the dark and promised to melt the ice, you became the only variable I cannot live without. Tears finally spilled over my eyelashes, tracking down my cheeks. Victoria, we are entirely different people. You run an empire. I run a broken espresso machine. What happens when the novelty wears off? What happens when I'm just an employee who outlived her usefulness? A look of profound agony crossed Victoria's beautiful features. She let go of my wrist, only to wrap both of her arms securely around my waist, pulling me flush against her body. You are not my employee, Victoria whispered, leaning down until our foreheads were resting together. You are my equal. You are the fire that keeps this house warm. Lily doesn't just want a companion, Harper. She wants her mommy. She wants the woman who makes a mess in the kitchen and paints dragons on the floor. She tilted my head up, forcing me to meet her intense, burning gaze. And I, Victoria breathed, her voice dropping to a dark, husky register that made my soul shiver, want the woman who isn't afraid to push back. I want the woman who challenges me, who fights for me, who loves me even when I am terrifying. I am completely, utterly consumed by you, Harper Davis. The last remnants of my stubborn pride shattered into a million pieces. I reached up, my hands tangling into the thick, dark waves of her hair, and pulled her down. When our lips met this time, there was no hesitation. There was no battle for dominance. It was a complete, overwhelming surrender from both of us. Victoria groaned, a deep, rumbling sound of absolute relief, her arms tightening around my waist as she lifted me slightly off the floor, pressing me backward onto the bed. Kiss was a promise. It was a collision of the cold, untouchable billionaire and the fiery, stubborn barista, forging something entirely new and unbreakable. I tasted the salt of her tears mixing with mine. Her hands were everywhere, desperate and reverent, tracing the lines of my body through my worn clothes as if memorizing a sacred text. I pulled her closer, my heart beating in perfect, chaotic rhythm with hers. The storm outside had finally passed, and for the first time in my life I felt entirely, perfectly safe. 3 months later. The bell above the door of the daily grind chimed brightly. I didn't immediately look up. I was busy steaming a pitcher of milk, expertly maneuvering the brand-new, top-of-the-line Italian espresso machine that had magically appeared in my shop 2 weeks ago. Café was packed. Chipped paint was gone, replaced by warm, inviting tones. The debt was entirely erased, and the deed to the building sat securely in a safe upstairs, legally in my name. 2 vanilla lattes coming right up, I called out to the waiting customers, pouring perfect fern leaf latte art into the ceramic cups. And what about a hot chocolate for your favorite customer? I froze, a massive smile breaking across my face before I even turned around. Standing on the other side of the counter was Lily. She was wearing a bright yellow raincoat, her dark hair pulled back into neat pigtails. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't trembling. She was beaming, her bright blue eyes sparkling with absolute joy. "Mama!" Lily cheered, reaching her arms up over the pastry display case. "Hey, sweetie," I laughed, abandoning the counter entirely to walk around and scoop her up into my arms. I kissed her cheek loudly, making her giggle. "Did you have a good day at school?" "The best day," a smooth, velvet voice answered for her. I looked up. Victoria Sterling stood in the doorway of my cafe. She was wearing a breathtaking, tailored slate gray suit. The severe bun was gone forever, her raven hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. The terrifying, icy alpha CEO mask that used to strike fear into the hearts of Seattle's business elite was nowhere to be found. Instead, as her blue eyes locked onto mine, they were filled with a profound, radiant warmth. She walked toward me, the busy cafe patrons parting instinctively to let her through. She stopped right in front of us, reaching out to gently brush a smudge of flour from my cheek, a gesture that had become her absolute favorite habit. "You're early," I murmured, leaning into her touch, my heart skipping a beat just like it did on the very first day she stormed in here. The board meeting concluded ahead of schedule, Victoria smiled, leaning in to press a soft, lingering kiss to my lips, completely ignoring the stunned looks of my regulars. She pulled back slightly, her gaze dropping to my lips with that same thrilling, predatory hunger that always made my breath catch. I decided my time was better spent with my family. Lily wrapped one arm around my neck and reached out with the other to grab Victoria's hand, pulling the three of us together into a tight circle. I looked at the little girl who had run into my life terrified, and the terrifying alpha who had followed her in. I smelled the mingling scents of roasted coffee, vanilla, cedarwood, and dark amber. Well, I smiled, looking into Victoria's warm, stormy eyes. I think that's the best executive decision you've ever made. End of story. And just like that, the Ice Queen's fortress finally melted into a warm, vanilla-scented home. Wow, take a deep breath with me, guys, because that was an absolute roller coaster of emotions. Welcome back to the real world, and thank you so much for sticking with me until the very end of this incredible story. Let's just take a minute to sit down and really unpack everything we just experienced together. The dynamic between Victoria and Harper was just absolute perfection, wasn't it? We started with Victoria, this terrifying, untouchable alpha CEO who thought she could just buy her way out of tragedy. She built this massive multi-million-dollar fortress of glass and stone, created endless schedules, and wrapped her heart in layers of impenetrable ice. She genuinely believed that control was the only way to keep her daughter safe. But then, in walks Harper. Harper wasn't just a barista drowning in debt, she was a fighter. I absolutely loved how she refused to back down. She was the anchor that Victoria and Lily didn't even know they desperately needed. Harper didn't care about the billions of dollars, the bodyguards, or the intimidating power suits. She cared about a little girl who needed her mom, and she cared enough to look past the alpha exterior to see the wounded, fiercely protective lioness underneath. And can we talk about that character development for Victoria? Going from an emotionally closed-off billionaire demanding compliance to a woman falling to her knees in the dirt just because Harper protected her child? That shift was so incredibly powerful. It just goes to show that sometimes the people who build the highest walls are the ones who are praying the hardest for someone brave enough to tear them down. Now, it's my turn to hear from you. I want us to chat down in the comments, so grab your coffee or your vanilla latte and let me know what you thought. Here is what I want to know. What was your absolute favorite moment between our two leads? Did your heart race during that intense standoff in the dark library, or were you melting during the chaotic pancake-making scene in the kitchen? Also, how satisfying was it to watch Victoria completely obliterate Evelyn, Vance, and her entire faction of the board? That I am an apex predator energy was off the charts. Do you think you would have been as brave as Harper if a billionaire CEO showed up at your job and demanded you pack a bag? Be honest. Tell me all your thoughts, your favorite quotes, and what kind of dynamic you want to see in our next story. I read every single comment, and I love geeking out over these characters with you all. If this story gave you butterflies, if you felt the tension radiating through your screen, and if you love fiercely romantic, heart-pounding stories, then please make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Give this video a big like to let the algorithm know we want more GL content, and make sure your notification bell is turned on so you never miss a new upload. You are officially part of the Your GL Girlfriend family, and I am so happy to have you here. Thank you again for watching, for listening, and for sharing your time with me today. Keep reading, keep loving, and I will see you all in the very next story. Bye for now.